Welcome to Ece Gurler Art. I tried my first portrait in oil paint and I did Alla Prima. Alla Prima takes its name from Italian and it means in one sitting. By using Stefan Baumann's tutorial, I tried to do my very first portrait. And I want to share with you my experience, how Alla Prima portrait works, what was the difficult part, what was the easy part. As you know, most of the oil painters work in layers. They do first layer and then they take a day or two break, and then when the paint is completely dry, they go for the second and third layer. But in Alla Prima, you work when your paint is still wet. So this makes it a little bit challenging because you need to work faster. Of course, I took a dinner break in between, but again, you cannot wait overnight because your paint will be half dry and you cannot work through that paint anymore. So in this video, let's try together very first portrait of mine in oil painting with Alla Prima method. I highly recommend you to not to skip because in every minute I'm going to share a very valuable information. First, let's talk about brushes. I had small and medium-sized flat brushes and also one small round brush and two filbert brushes. Number 4 is the round one. I have number 10 filbert brushes, and this is a very expensive number 8 Da Vinci flat brush, and I have another filbert brush here, and I have cat's tongue, which I never used, but you know, you never know. I have ivory black from Winsor & Newton. I have Old Holland yellow brown, and I mixed 2 reds, alizarin crimson and vermilion. I have titanium white, and I had to make a raw umber, so I mixed orange, green, and purple. This is my palette, guys. Only 5 colors. Let's talk about first draft. I drew my first draft with a graphite pencil, but you can use a colored pencil if you want. And then I went over it with a warm shade of raw umber. In order to warm it up, I added some yellow and red. And also I want it to be easy to apply, so I added some linseed oil. And I started with my round brush. I was just highlighting all the necessary lines and shapes. I was not going into detail at all. Then I realized the round brush was not the best choice because look, where the hairline is and the chin is, I didn't like how it was thickening. There was thick and thin areas in the lines, which I didn't like. So I switched to flat brush and it changed the whole thing. I was able to draw flat lines, beautiful curves. I think flat brush is the best when you're drawing your initial draft like this. And of course, not just the major lines or the major outline, I also added some dark places, the darkest areas that I see in the face, including the neck area and where the right eye is, under the nose, and some parts of the ear. Now, the next step is to add the midtones. You need to look at the area, a certain area, and try to find not the lightest, but not the darkest, but what is the medium tone there, and add that color everywhere you see in that area. For example, the hair, I try to make a warm brown, but it looks very cool in the screen right now, but it was warm. Also for the clothing, I try to make some kind of reddish black. I mixed raw umber, black, and red. And for the background, I made one cool gray. I added some blue to the gray, and then I made some warm gray by adding some yellow into it because I could see that some part of the background is cooler than the other part. After applying these 2 shades of gray here, then you can see me warming up the gray there with yellow. And next, I'm going to move on to the skin tones. I just want to make a neutral gray for the skin. I want to have the lightest, a little bit darker, and the darkest parts. so that I can apply this wherever I see. But the face has more compartments, I would say, more areas that need more midtones. I cannot do the face as I did the background. That's what I'm trying to say. And the neck was challenging for me because I felt like there were more different shades of gray there, more than 2. And I immediately wanted to give more details like highlights and such, but you know, the whole point of this stage is to leave those white of the paper so that it still looks like the first initial layer, almost like an underpainting. So you need to keep yourself from giving more details than you need. By the way, I highly recommend you to keep one brush for the darkest or dark areas and one brush for the lighter ones, because otherwise it gets really confusing. And here, don't do what I do. I'm crunching over my easel. It's usually not good for your painting or not good for your back health. So in order to blend, after your first layer is done, you can just go and add another layer of paint by applying this little soft brush touches. And when I used this Da Vinci brush, I couldn't believe how smooth it was. It was a sable brush, so it was affecting a lot. It was definitely making a difference, and I fell in love with this brush. I highly recommend it. Yes, it's expensive, but it's definitely worth it, especially blending different shades, different colors. Look, it makes a difference. Also, between the paint, please don't forget to clean your brush with a 100% cotton rag. I made a mistake. It was too dark, so I went over it with a lighter tone, which was too light. It looked like a yogurt there. And what I did is just darken it up a little bit without any panic and went over it, and it was all gone. So this is the best part of oil painting, if you ask me. It is very forgiving. So once you don't like something, you can go back and change it, and that is risk-free if you ask me. And with Alla Prima, because you're working with wet paint, you can always make changes along the way. Yes, you need to move quickly because you should do what you want to do before the paint is dry. Yes, you cannot work on very big canvases because then it's gonna take forever. You need to work on small ones because, for example, this took me 8 hours, and if it was bigger, probably it would take me like 15 hours. I cannot do 15 hours in one sitting. So these are the maybe disadvantages, but there are also advantages. Here in the background, I just mixed the wet paint that was already on the paper. By the way, I forgot to tell you, this is Stonehenge oil paper. And again, Stefan Baumann suggested it, and I love this paper already. As a student myself, I don't want to, use expensive canvases yet. And I'm going to experiment on these papers and see how far I can go. And then once I get more expertise on this, definitely I will work on canvas more. And for the details, as you can see, my round brush worked really well. And one thing I want to suggest, when your paint gets this big, clean them up, guys. Just scrape them and then put them on top of your palette. I have a glass palette, I highly recommend, with your palette knife. And then you clean it with a piece of paper tissue and your mineral spirits. Clean. Perfect. Now you can start again. While giving details, you can come closer, of course, to the easel because it starts to shine, guys. Like, it got darker and I was using this light behind me, but then it started to shine, so I needed to change my direction quite often and I didn't like it. I highly recommend you to do this kind of Alla Prima painting during the daylight. That will be the perfect option, if you ask me. And while working on the details, you can always do other blendings as you go, as you remember new things or as you see new things, and add more shades of, like, maybe warmer shades of that red tone or brown tone, or maybe cooler shades need more cooling. So you can do that as you go. For blending though, don't forget that you need to clean your brush, otherwise you might carry that lightest color into the dark or darkest shade into the light, just like I did here. We are closing all the whites of the paper now. The portrait is coming along, and I'm adding more mixture of that red, black, and raw umber. As you can see, my head is there. I'm so sorry about this, but because it was shining a lot, I needed to get closer to see clearly. But again, I want to show you the difference between cheaper brush and more expensive brush. So this is my cheaper brush, and you can barely see what I'm trying to do. And I try to give this line here, but you will see what will happen when I try to blend it so that it looks more natural. It's gone. So I was like, where did it go? But when I try with my Da Vinci brush here, I felt like the paint was getting into the lower layer more, into the paper more, and when I blend with other brush, you will see the difference. But I do the first blending with this brush, and then I go final brush touches with the cheap brush, and you can see the difference. So this is why I think maybe more than paint, brush is the key in Alla Prima oil painting. I'm cleaning my brush because, see, it's not very clean, so it gave that little stain there, and it's getting worse now, and I'm getting more impatient, but gone. See? Now, also, one thing I realized with Alla Prima, because the lower layer is still wet, no matter how dark you go, because the paint on the palette is almost black, it's very dark brown, but when I apply it on the neck, you will see that it's not that dark. It doesn't look that dark because the lower layer is lighter tone and it's still wet. So you need to take this into account when you start your painting. I will make another video about cool colors and warm colors, transparent and opaque colors and paint. What's the difference? You will see that in a couple of weeks, I promise. Here also, I wanted to show you a little bit more, even almost, again, like a darker red here I'm trying to apply, but it doesn't work the way I want it to be. Eventually, I got it dark, guys, after a few layers. Adding details is another challenge with Alla Prima, because if the lower layer, the first layer, was dry, adding the wet paint wouldn't be a problem, but it mixes with the lower layer, so it doesn't make it as black, for example, as it should look, or it doesn't, how can I say, give that opaque effect. It looks very transparent because it mixes with the lower layer, and this is why it is not going to exactly look like, let's say, Renaissance portraits, but it still has this, how can I say, dreamy element to it, and I really liked it. But giving details was challenging. It was more challenging than painting and trying to blend all these different colors and such. I'm adding highlights here, and you can see that it makes such big difference, especially with the ear. The ear looks more realistic now thanks to the highlights. The eye had highlights, and also now I'm adding more highlights to the neck. But if you forget to clean your brush, then you will make everywhere like highlighted, and you don't want to do that. Clean in every paint application. It should be automatic after a while. And you see that I added eyelashes while I was holding my brush from the top. You can fix things as you go along, and I'm adding more highlights to the hair now. Highlights here, highlights there, which gives the direction of the hair. And also there is more highlights on the lower section of the hair. With flat brush, it's so easy to give these hair effects. I'm holding my brush not very tight, it's very loose, guys. I don't know if you can see from this angle. I think I'm coming to the end, and you can blend it with clean brush right afterwards. And I'm darkening up this area and warming up with red a little bit more, and it's ready. What do you think? Please share in the comments if this tutorial was helpful for you, if you had any questions about Alla Prima. But I want to say that I really loved Alla Prima because it gives quick results. But if you're an impatient artist, Alla Prima is not for you. If you would like more content like this, please share in the comments.